Hello, Facebook world, and welcome to all of our participants who are on their way into our Zoom room. Oh my gosh, happy fifth night of Hanukkah, everybody. It is great to see you, great to be surrounded with friendly faces and all kinds of light and sparkles, all of the joy of this season. It is wonderful to have you all with us. It's great to be back together. I'm Rabbi Sarah Berman. I'm the Director of Adult Education here at Central Synagogue, and we are delighted to have you join us this evening. A couple of months ago, I got a message from our senior rabbi, Angela Bookdahl, and it had some unlikely content in it. It was from a friend of hers from the Jewish music world, who also just happened to be the editor of Batman comics. An unlikely combination, you might think. Well, we are here tonight with Gorf, the very same man that Angela was writing to me about, and we have quite the fun night ahead of us. I invite you, if you are in our Zoom room, to put any questions that you have into our chat box. And at any moment throughout the presentation, if you have a question or a comment, drop that in the chat box. And we will get to those questions towards the end of the presentation. And so now, with Gorf, just a bit of a mystery, I welcome this mysterious man to our community. Welcome, Gorf.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here. Chag Sameach, happy Hanukkah, everybody. I'm going to confirm that everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. My name is Jordan B. Gorfinkel, which is Gorf. And you may notice that those are 4 letters that, if spelled backwards, becomes frog. So it's frog, Gorf, Gorf, frog, and now you're not going to forget me. And I just pressed the wrong button. Forgive me for a second. We are here tonight to talk about Batman and Bitachon, Jewish storytelling from superheroes to music. And you'll notice also that bitachon, which is the Hebrew word for faith, as in security and faith, is spelled kind of like the Beatles, and there's a reason for that. If you ask me what I am, in total, the sum total of everything that I do, I am a storyteller, and specifically a Jewish storyteller. And I'm a storyteller who tells storytelling in all media. But let's first define terms over here. What does it mean to be a storyteller? Does it mean to be sitting on the side of your child's bed and reading them a goodnight story? Does it mean to be creating that goodnight story? Does it mean to be on television or in the movies or streaming live on Facebook? To me, the definition of storytelling is when you're engaging the audience emotionally via narrative. Now, that's a mouthful. You'll notice that I highlighted 3 specific words over here: engaging, emotionally, and narrative. Engaging means that people are into it. And here's a little tip. I'm going to be giving you lots of tips that you can carry into your own lives. Although this was originally meant to be a retrospective on my own life and career in the media, Jewish and otherwise, something funny happened along the way, and I discovered that there was a certain coincidence, or maybe there are no coincidences. It's beshert, it's meant to be a theme running through my entire life, and you'll see shortly what that is. And here's a little tip for you. When, and I just did this, by the way, when you are giving some kind of a talk and you go more than 5 minutes without telling a little story, an anecdote or something, you're probably losing the audience. So you'll notice I just went into a little story and I was probably maybe 2 minutes in. And that is to engage the audience. And then you want to engage them emotionally, which means that you want to share your passion in a way that it becomes infectious, that they too are emotionally engaged, not just engaged because they have to, but because they want to. And how do we do it via narrative? What's a narrative? A narrative is a story. And we're going to talk about story and storytelling in all media this evening. The number 4, that is the theme for our evening, because I've discovered that in my career, there's a confluence of 4s. It is going to be the organizing principle for what we are going to be discussing and thinking about this evening. And we know that in Judaism, the number 4 comes up quite a bit. And I'd love to see your examples in the chat. And I'll give a pause in a couple minutes to ask, what have you thought of? What numbers are there? Excuse me, what number 4s are there in Judaism? 4 is in the arts, 4 is in life, and 4 is in time. And you'll notice, by the way, that I gave you 4 categories of 4. And I'm going to be reviewing those 4 categories of 4 through my life within the 4 decades that I have been and still am at it as a Jewish storyteller. Let's start with decade number 1. Decade number 1. Here are the 4 major themes of that first decade of my career. Working on Batman and Birds of Prey, Beat Achon, the Jewish a cappella group, the pioneering Jewish a cappella group, excuse me, my Jewish cartoon, Everything's Relative, and my Mishpacha, which we'll get back to in a second. So why is this Dark Knight different from all other nights? And the answer is because I was a proud out Jew when I was working at DC Comics. And during a period of time that was almost a decade, I helped to run the franchise, increasing the number of publications from 2 a month to 2 a week with a wonderful team of Bat guys. And you see here the comic books and the toys and the rides and the movies and the video games, all of which I had some influence on. And specifically, I was charged with taking the comics from the inception of the ideas through the conclusion of the publications, and then also liaisoning with all the different multimedia. And there were a couple of major highlights while I was the editor of Batman comics. One of them was that I created a series called Batman No Man's Land, which ran through all of the Batman titles for 1 calendar year, encompassing about 1,200 pages worth of story. And I created that storyline because I felt like I wanted to do my magnum opus, or I guess my Batman opus. I have been honored, and I never thought about it at the time that this was even possible, to have the storyline translated into multimedia, including the 3rd of the wonderful Christopher Nolan movie series, The Dark Knight Rises. I also created Birds of Prey. Excuse me. Birds of Prey is the very first female superhero franchise starring women, and it is female, I should say, female group superhero franchise starring women. And this was most recently translated into the feature film of the same name. And what was important to me was taking a lot of the ways that we respect women and women's roles in Judaism and applying them towards comic books. Now, many of us have seen what comics look like and have read comics and enjoyed comics and seen also the adaptations into movies and so forth. And I don't think I'm stepping out of line by saying that many times women can be objectified. So I introduced certain chidushim, certain original ideas to the Birds of Prey superhero team. One was that the women wear pants. It seemed to me that if they're going out and fighting crime, wearing very short shorts was not a very good idea. Another thing was they actually changed their clothes. Now, many times the superhero women will be dressed rather scantily and wear the same outfit in any situation. Well, it seemed logical that, like real people, they would have different outfits for different occasions. And most of all, the 2 women that starred in the superhero franchise were friendly with each other and had a camaraderie and had a yin and a yang to each other that complemented each other. And all these things must have succeeded and must have struck a chord, because in 25 years or so, this series has continued to succeed and to proliferate. And of course, earn major box office for DC Comics and its parent company, Time Warner. Let's get back to the number 4 then. 4 in entertainment franchise building. We talked about Batman and Birds of Prey. Let's use Batman as an example. And I'm cribbing a little bit from another presentation that I make called The 4 Children, and it relates superheroes, Marvel and DC superheroes, to the Arba Banim, which we'll talk a lot more about a little later on. Spoiler alert, I just gave away one of the 4s that we find in Judaism. And we have the hero, we have the villain, we have the mentor, and we have the sidekick. These are the 4 components to creating a successful Batman story. And I would argue, and after all, you know, we're Jews, so we're Talmudic, we argue always amicably, but nevertheless, that this is going to be a very important structure moving forward as we talk about all the different media that I'm involved with. And hopefully you'll be able to, again, take the messages and the instructions that I'm giving back into your regular lives. So for more, you can see my 4 Children presentation. Maybe I'll have the honor of presenting it to you folks sometime in the future. And let's go on. So the second of my 4 in my first decade was taking me from Batman to Borscht Belt. jewishcartoon.com, which was called Everything's Relative in its original publication, which was the late lamented New York Jewish Week, and now it's part of the Link out of New Jersey. And when I was, here's a story for you. See, it's been a couple minutes, got to tell a story. When I was the editor of Batman Comics, I had always dreamt of being a comic strip artist. I love the comic strips in newspapers. And by the way, if there are any young people who are joining us right now, just to explain what a newspaper is when you take the internet and you print it out and you hand it to people. That's a newspaper. Okay, now that we've got our historical terms down, maybe later on we'll go into, vinyl records and 8-track, so maybe not. I always dreamt of being a comic strip artist. And I got a call from somebody who actually worked. I worked on the 6th floor. Somebody who worked on the 4th floor with one of the executives at DC Comics, who said in her wonderful Southern voice, I'm not going to try to mimic it. She too was Jewish and working at DC Comics. And she said, I have a friend who's the editor of the Atlanta Jewish Times, and he'd really like to do a Jewish comic strip. Do you know anybody? And I said, yes. And I went home and I worked all night and I came up with this comic strip. And let's take a look at how the number 4 was very fundamental in my adapting my knowledge of comics from working on Batman into humor strips. Well, first of all, we have 4 cartoon panels. The panels is what we call the sequential boxes that we put the artwork in. And here is an example, a couple of examples of the cartoons that I do on a weekly basis now at jewishcartoon.com. And let's have some fun and read the first one. And you'll notice, by the way, that this is Passover themed, and you'll understand why. We're at Hanukkah right now, but we're going to talk a lot about Passover, and you'll understand soon why. So in the first one, the guy is trying to urge somebody on the phone, as you can see. No, I don't want to buy. Panel number 2, I need to sell. Number 3, his wife says, waited too long to sell your stocks, eh? And he says, no. And in the 4th panel, my chametz. Let's take a closer look at the second one here. I love this one, and I admit it's probably, well, let's just take a look. Number 1, had my husband helped with the shopping, Dayenu, it would have been enough. Had my husband helped with the cooking, Dayenu, it would have been enough. Had my husband gotten the kids dressed so I could be on time for services, Dayenu, it would have been enough. And now the punchline, number 4, the husband says, I think I've had enough of this customized Seder. And the wife says, hush, I have 27 more verses. So yes, I'm kind of putting some roles, more traditional roles, male and female roles over here, but I think there's a truism in this. And part of the job of being a humorist is to exaggerate what we have all experienced so that it is relatable, and doing it by telling stories in this 4-panel structure. What are the cartooning stages? How do we build a cartoon? Again, there are 4 stages. The first one is the script. And anyone who has spent some time with me knows that you got to be careful what you talk about around me, because I may blurt out, that's a cartoon. Can I use that? Scripting is when you can see it over here on a piece of paper. I number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I literally write out the shot description and the dialogue, so that later on, when I get to the art, I know exactly what I'm going to draw and I know exactly what the characters are going to say. So step number 2 is the penciling. I use a non-repro blue pencil, what I like to call my magic pencil, to draw all the drawings. And I don't have to worry about making any mistakes, because as my Jewish Cartoon Workshop kids know, this non-repro blue pencil registers as clear, as transparent when you photocopy it or when you scan it. So that means that all I have to do is ignore any of the mistakes that I make, because when I use my ink pen, I will trace over only what I want people to see, and the rest will disappear, as you can see right here. And of course, I just skipped over the previous step, which is the lettering stage, where we use, once again, the magic blue pencil and then trace over it to do the lettering. And that, folks, equals a cartoon. Now, I kind of cheated over here because there is a 5th stage. You may have noticed that the cartoon is in color, but the truth is, I don't really do the color much myself. I'm very collaborative, and that's very important when you're a creator, to be open to other people's ideas and other people's skill sets. Many times I liken myself as a chef, and I like to take all of the ingredients from here and there, and there's no greater pleasure than putting them all together, than assembling them wherever the best ideas are, wherever the best talents are, into hopefully the best possible product. And as you can see over here, the coloring just brings it to life. This is my family of characters. They are all regular characters through whom I can tell stories, and that I can also, within the stories, do individual gags so that the strip operates on two levels. And this is also very important. Level number one is that these are standalone gags, that you don't have to have read anything else. You don't have to have any other knowledge of this feature in order to understand what's going on. But if you read over time, and you engage emotionally through the narrative over time, then my hope is you will gain an even deeper appreciation of the storyline through the characters. You're going to see that search for clarity as being a very important theme in my work, and indeed in any creator's work, because there is nothing worse than somebody reading one of the cartoons, especially when I'm standing there, oh, is that painful? And they read it and go, uh-huh. And then at the end, they're kind of stone-faced and they look up at me and say, oh, I don't get it. That's my fault. If you don't get it, I'm not doing my job. So throughout all of the material that I'm showing you today, my chief foremost job, in addition to making the ships run on time and to be entertaining and engaging and so forth, is to be clear, to be crystal clear. The third pillar of my first decade was founding the first professional Jewish a cappella group called Beit Achon. And we introduced that in the beginning of our presentation here. And lo and behold, here we are again, revisiting Beit Achon, B-E-A-T, like the Beatles, A-C-H-O-N. Now, we learned to kind of regret that clever spelling because it was constantly misspelled and also constantly mispronounced. One time we were introduced as, and now, B'teavon. And unfortunately, there was no food behind us. Then there was also one time when somebody said, and now we present to you Beat Action. Well, we Jewish people hopefully do a little better at understanding the trials and tribulations of transliteration. Why did we settle on Jewish a cappella? Well, I was raised, I never really grew up, so I'll say I was raised on a tradition of harmony singing. And I loved listening to the Beatles, and I loved listening to the Beach Boys and all those great harmony groups of the 60s into the 70s. And when I moved to New York after college, I hung out with a wonderful group of people, most of whom were transplanted from Chicago, one from Detroit, one from St. Louis, some Midwesterners. And we all shared this love of harmony. And for the most part, we also shared an inability to play musical instruments proficiently. We read music and we understood music, and we're going to get into that in a second. But we had a very difficult time actually, with that hand-eye coordination, but we loved singing in harmony. So we decided, hey, let's do something, like the groups that we loved as youths. And let's put together the very first professional Jewish a cappella group. And for a decade, Beit Achon performed and was the only game in town when it comes to that kind of music. And before, in the lovely introduction, Sean Altman was referenced. We'll get back to him in a second. He was actually the friend of Rabbi Buchdahl, who introduced me to her initially, and that made this connection so that I could be here with you today. And Sean was part of a group called Cappella. And Cappella was one of my influences in doing Jewish a cappella. And that's another thing. You'll see that there is a real intermix and intertwining between my secular, meaning non-Jewish influences, let's call it universal, that's a better word, my universal influences and my Jewish influences. My belief is you can take inspiration from almost anywhere, and there's a term in Judaism called ma'ale b'kedusha, when you're raising the holiness, the level of holiness of something. So by taking my influence from what's in the popular culture, what's in the zeitgeist, and applying it to Judaism, we're doing ma'ale b'kedusha, we're raising the holiness of it. Let's talk about song structure now. Back to the number 4, song structure. So as you listen to the following Beit Achon performance, captured on high fidelity VHS-C tape in 1999, can you alert me to where you hear the 4s? The 4s, for example, in the music, 4 beats per measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you also notice the 4s in the lyrics, the segment groupings of lyrics that add up to 4? Let's take a listen, shall we? Here we go. Oh, by the way, I'll tell you the story afterwards. Sorry, we're having a momentary freeze. Let's try that again. My daughter, bless her heart, when I showed her this clip last night, she exclaimed, and this was in a DM, in a direct message, she exclaimed, "Oh, organized nerd dancing. I love it." So I hope you appreciated that. What we did in this song was we applied the universal melody from a very popular song, which you may recognize, right? To what I like to call the ultimate Jewish karaoke set of words, which is Adon Olam. And Adon Olam is structured in fours so that virtually any melody fits to it. And the story behind this one was we were walking on the boardwalk, not under the boardwalk, but on the boardwalk in Miami Beach. We had a concert that evening, and we just started singing the song and decided, hey, what if we just apply it? And that night, right on stage, we did it. It was a big hit. And there you go. So influence is coming from everywhere. We were walking on the boardwalk. We were in a universal experience. We took a song that is universally beloved. We applied it to Judaism. And the next thing you know, there you have it. Another example of that is that Bitachon took the song Sloop John B from the Beach Boys and applied that to the Shabbat Zemer, the Shabbat song, Derori Yikra, which has become universally popular. And once again, this all came about because we had Jewishly involved parents who loved harmony music, who inspired us, and then we went on to form this group. And by the way, now we're so proud to be able to identify, we're about to show you my 4 Gorf children, but so far, so proud to be able to identify more than 50 plus harmony groups, a cappella groups that are on Hillel campuses and indeed around the world, with viral videos that are popular at Hanukkah and all around the calendar. And nobody ever says anymore what we experienced when we first decided to do this. When we first started, we went to producers all over town and we said, we've got this great idea. We're going to have an a cappella group. And every producer in town said, yeah, well, when you get instruments behind you, give me a ring back. Well, we decided we're going to go forward with this anyway. And nowadays, nobody ever questions, is this bona fide legitimate music? It is. And everybody enjoys it, doesn't think there are musical instruments missing. And in fact, you'll see later on how we developed the idea even further. So the 4th pillar of my first decade was, of course, my children. And no one gives me more influence, positive and challenging, than my children. You see here Noam, Eliana, the aforementioned nerd dancing lover. My wife, Amy, below her is Ori, and then Ashira, who's a fantastic musician herself, more talented in her pinky than my entire body. Decade number 2, folks. Avalanche Comics Entertainment, the Jewish Museum in Munich, Germany, Kol Zimra, and Voices for Israel. So as usual, let's start with comics and then we'll work into music. As you see here, this is the logo for my boutique creative agency. And when I parted amicably from DC Comics, and many people ask, well, you know, you were in charge of Batman. How could you possibly want to leave that job? It's the dream job. And the answer is yes, it was. But I also, as I talk about in another one of my presentations more deeply, I also felt like I had accomplished everything that I wanted to do. And it was like my graduate school program. And I wanted to move on to applying it to all kinds of other adventures. So you see here what my studio does. They take the raw ideas represented by the sketchy pencil figures on the left, and they get filtered through the guru of creativity. And you come out with fully fledged, full color, fully realized characters and stories. And Avalanche Comics Entertainment has worked in 3 basic areas: with corporations, with nonprofits, and of course with entertainment studios. And I'm going to show you a few examples, but I always like to try to bring it back to the Judaism. You know, when I go into situations where I'm singing at smachot, for example, and we'll get into that in Kol Zimra in a second, and people request a Beatles song or a Billy Joel song or the latest whatever Billie Eilish song to sing at a bar or bat mitzvah. When I'm walking around with my group of a cappella singers, I always say, okay, we'll do this one for you, but now I want to hear from you. What songs, Jewish songs, do you like? Maybe it's something from your grandparents, or it's from your youth, or maybe you go to a Hebrew school program or a day school or a summer camp. What is it that you want to hear? So I always give one for them and one for me. So I'm giving you the fun stuff that you probably came here for, the Batman and so forth, but I always want to bring it back to Judaism because that's my passion. One of the big projects we worked on was a project called Heroes Happen Here, the award-winning Microsoft launch, for which we created a daily web comic over 6 months that garnered a 1.2 million person audience. And by the way, this was in 2000, I don't know, 7, 8, something like that. So this was right at the dawn of Facebook. We were using RSS feeds and emails. The social media was just a glimmer in Mark Zuckerberg's eye at that point. So to gather 1.2 million people in a more analog way is quite remarkable. And you'll see that theme popping up in the second decade of my life more than once. Bringing into the Jewish, we also created Jewish graphic novels, such as this one about the story of David and Saul and Goliath, done in the style of Frank Miller's 300, for those of you who know the reference. And more recently, we had the honor of working for the Dallas Holocaust Museum Center for Education and Tolerance. And what we were charged to do was to create a series of 10 novellas. You can see them in the upper right-hand rectangle that were collected together in the center circle in a package. And the idea was that we would have these novellas available in the exhibit. There were 10 exhibits that would trace the root causes of genocides and then overlay them over the root causes of the Holocaust, so that people would have a greater sensitivity not only to the Holocaust, but to how genocide is unfortunately something that is still with us, that it has been historical and is still with us, with the hopes, of course, that by creating this awareness, people would be able to work to prevent it. And in the novellas, we went into the details, the backstories of the 10 genocides that were identified in these exhibits. And people could read them right there, or they could take the comic books back with them. And I think comics is an incredibly powerful tool for education, empowerment, education, enlightenment. And you'll see how that in the third decade got translated writ large into Jewish. And by the way, my wife, you saw before that we did actually, I think it's coming up next. Yeah, here it is, the Munich Jewish Museum. So when I was working on the Munich Jewish Museum project, the guy that I was staying with, in fact, Yossi, blanking on his last name right now, Yossi, anyway. So he and his family, a Jewish family, were living in Munich, and he was working for Microsoft at the time. And he watched as I was hired to create a series of my jewishcartoon.com, or everything's relative, comic strips to represent the obviously very difficult subject of Jewish, non-Jewish relations in the 20th century in Munich and in Germany. And that's how I landed the Microsoft job. There's more of a story behind it, but bottom line is, once again, the universal to the Jewish and back to the universal, it's all intertwined. You never know when an opportunity or inspiration is going to come. So what you see here in this picture is the entrance to the Munich Jewish Museum's permanent exhibition. And literally, when you walk into the exhibition, the first thing you will see are my cartoons plastered on the wall. And below, you can see the English translations. We did them in German and we did them with English translations. And I guess it's going pretty well because so far nobody has taken a mallet to the wall, which seems to be the only way that you can take these down. And I should tell you that when the Munich Jewish Museum, when the director first reached out to me, and he said, Gorf, which is of course frog backwards, Gorf, we would like you to take your 4-panel humor strip and create a series about your character, your Zadie character, visiting us in Munich, and we want punchlines. So I thought, Holocaust punchlines, that doesn't really pair up very well. And I said, I'll give you the name and number of Art Spiegelman. He's the guy who created Mouse, M-A-U-S rather, the award-winning Holocaust graphic novel, and maybe he's better suited. No, we really want you. So I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to take it, because if I don't take it and somebody else takes it and they screw it up, I'm going to feel bad. So if somebody's going to screw it up, it might as well be me. Thank God it seems to have gone fairly well. And you can see those online. And of course, if you're ever visiting Munich, which is a powerful, powerful experience. All right, let's shift to music because we go comics to music, going back and forth here. Let's dig into a cappella harmony music a little bit and the number 4. So we talked before a little bit about how in music you have 4 in the number of beats per minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have groupings of 4 ideas that form the verses and the choruses. And we're going to show you examples of that coming up real soon. But first, let's break down that harmony. So the individual guys who were transplanted from the Midwest to the New York area and Bitachon, eventually something happens to groups. You know, you wonder, why did the Beatles break up? Well, it's not really so much because there's acrimony, it's more that life goes on. So when you're in your 20s and you're all living in the same geographic area, it's easy to get together and to create music and have the time and the energy and so forth. But then you start to get married, you start to build a family. I showed you my family before, thank God. And when that happens, it becomes very difficult to hold what we were doing, which was rehearsing 3 times a week, 3 hours a piece. I mean, you heard how tight we were. There were no computers back then. That was 6 guys singing live right onto high fidelity VHS-C tape, folks, videotape. And for the kids out there, if you want to know what videotape is, ask your parents. So Bitachon begat Kol Zimra. The idea behind Kol Zimra was that instead of having a group that would rehearse, we would rely on our skill and ability to improvise, to listen to each other and use music theory and instinct to be able to go into simchas like bar and bat mitzvahs and weddings and so forth, a group of 6, 8, 10 people. Sometimes it's all guys, sometimes it's co-ed, sometimes it's even all women. And we would sing the songs that people want to hear. And this way we would be much more flexible. So instead of it taking 3 months to write an arrangement and learn it and so forth, we would just on the spot break into it. So as long as somebody knew the lyrics and somebody had a sense of what the chord structure was, the rest of us would look and follow along and be able to improvise. And I'm proud to say that what we innovated back then in interactive, spiritual and spirited, simcha-oriented event music, a cappella music, has become something of a standard now. So I see in the New York area, many times you will have your decor and you will have your food, and of course you'll have your guests, but what makes the memories and what impacts people is your harmony singers. And that's why our tagline is inspiring Jewish harmony. And I mean it in 2 ways, because we're inspiring Jewish harmony in you, but we're also acting as representatives of inspiring Jewish harmony. So we are inspiring Jewish harmony and we are inspiring Jewish harmony, if you take my meaning. And you can go to kolzimra.com to learn more. But let's get into the music now. 4 voices. So how do we do this? How do we form harmony music, whether it's bitachon or Kol Zimra? Let's break it down. And we begin with the tenor voice, which is the higher voice. If it's a woman, it's a soprano. If it's a male, it's a tenor. Hang on, a little bit of freezing going on. It'll. And the alto or the tenor too sounds like this. And we go down to the tenor or baritone. And the bass is setting some of the percussive feel to it. And when you combine them all together, you get Jewish harmony like nothing else in the tradition of the synagogue, all the way through rock capella and now into Kol Zimra. Hey, Kol Zimra had the honor of performing twice at the White House for the president and VIPs. And I'd love to be able to show you now a clip from that concert. I'll tell you another story right now. And as you listen to that clip or watch that clip, it's going to be video, I want you to think again about song structure. Where do you find the fours in the music and the lyrics? Can you catch the fours? So I'm going to tell you a quick story about how that came about. I was hanging out in Los Angeles. I don't remember what I was there for, probably some mainstream Universal Entertainment, something or other. And I was with my friend Sean Altman. And what am I saying? It was with my friend Sam Glazer. And Sam was working in a studio. He has a studio in his back house, and I was probably either working with him or doing something else, hanging out, whatever be the case. And on my cell phone, a number came up, and the number was something odd, just like the number 202, and that's it. And I thought, oh, that's very strange. Who could this possibly be? So I picked it up, and when I answered it, the person on the other end said, "Please hold for the White House." Huh? And then somebody came on the phone and said, "Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm the Jewish liaison to the White House, and we love Kol Zimra. We'd love you to please come and perform for our newly started annual, what we intend to be the annual Hanukkah menorah lighting or Chanukiah lighting at the White House, inside the White House." And I said, "Ha, come on, Sam, you're a joker. You're in the other room, and how did you pull this off?" And the guy said, no, very seriously. "I'm from the White House. We really want to invite you." So I don't know where I found the chutzpah, but I said to the guy, "Okay, listen, if you're for real, here's what I want you to do. I want you to please write me a letter on White House letterhead, and I want you to mail it. Here's my address. And if you're for real, then I'll get the letter." And I hung up the phone and thought nothing of it. Well, sure, lo and behold, a week later, the letter arrived in the mail, and it was for real. And we got invited a couple of times, and it was really a phenomenal experience. Regardless of who's in the White House, honoring the democracy that has given we Jewish people a home like almost no other, with the possible exception of Israel. And I say possible exception just because, Israel is obviously in a whole different category than America, but having the democracy of America embrace us and allow me to have the creative freedom to turn my passion into my vocation, my avocation into my dreams, into my vocation. There's no greater blessing in the entire world. And God bless America. That's all I got to say about that. And here's what I have to sing. So listen once again and see if you can pick out the fours. Hanukkah leads us strong on a holy night. Hanukkah brightens the world with each candle's light. Hanukkah leads us strong on a holy night. Hanukkah brightens the world with each candle's light. With each candle's light. Let you in a little story behind that. So that was an original anthem that Sam and I co-wrote just specifically for this occasion. And the other funny thing about it was we got those guys together in a hotel room across the street, maybe 4 hours before. We learned the song, we rehearsed the song, and we got up and did the song. And it was just an amazing experience, so uplifting, and a real honor, a real blessing to be able to give a tribute to the United States of America in that way. Hanukkah keeps us strong. 1, on 8 holy nights. 2, Hanukkah brightens the world with each candle's light. 4, 4, 4, 4, always with fours. The next pillar of my second decade was Voices for Israel, which was the Jewish We Are the World, where we assembled, as you can see over here, a number of Jewish stars to all sing together as a tribute to victims of terrorism in Israel. We got 4 denominations united: Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and Cultural. And it was, again, quite the remarkable experience. We did 2 double CDs, which raised tens of thousands of dollars, again, to support victims of terrorism in Israel at the time the Intifada, Second Intifada, was going on. And some of us may remember that as a very dark time. We did an all-male project and we did an all-female project. Let's give a listen now to the Chazak Amenu We Stand as One song from the first of the 2 double CD sets. And let's take a listen for, once again, the confluence of fours. How did we structure this original song and try to distill all the roiling emotions of the period into a song that, once again, engaged the audience emotionally through a narrative? Because songs aren't just about melody or words. If you have just a melody, then you're humming. If you have just words, it's a poem. But when you put the 2 together, it's greater than the sum of the parts. Take a listen.
Another siren wails, just an ordinary day.
Was it anyone I know? How can life go on this way?
Chazak v'nit chazak,
we sing the words out loud
to strengthen one another.
Together, standing proud.
Chazak, chazak,
We stand as one.
chazak, chazak,
we must be strong.
chazak, chazak, we will go on.
Yaseh Shalom.
Fours in 4 beats. It's 4/4 times, so it's 4 beats per measure. Another siren wails, just an ordinary day. Was it anyone I know? How can life go on this way? Chazak v'nit chazak. We sing the words out loud to strengthen one another. Together, standing proud. Then the chorus. Chazak, chazak. We stand as one. Chazak, chazak. We must be strong. Chazak, chazak, we will go on. Yaseh shalom. And you'll notice that the 4 over here, these 4 lines, are structured very much like the cartoon that I showed you earlier. And this hadn't occurred to me until I was putting this presentation together for you. Remember the cartoon about Dayenu, where the wife was saying, if only my husband had done this, Dayenu. If only my husband had done this, Dayenu. And the third one, if only my husband had done this, Dayenu. And in the 4th panel, we have a conclusion. So we have a repeating motif in the first 3, and then we have a conclusion in the 4th one, and the structure of the song is exactly the same. 4s. Remarkable to me. Let's take a listen to Keeping the Faith. Now here is, we're going to raise it up a little bit of a level. So in the Keeping the Faith song, the song was actually written in 3/4 time, waltz time. And how does the number 4 then come in when there are 3 beats per measure? So in this song, it's ba 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 ba, instead of it being ba 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 ba. And we had an interesting problem that we had to solve. In the middle of the song, it felt like emotionally the song was sagging a little bit, that we lost our grip on the audience, and we needed something to kind of fill the gap. So we brought in a very special guest star, spoiler alert, because the headline of this page shows you what we did, a very special guest star. And we found a series of words that equal 4, that fit the space perfectly, even in 3/4 time. which I think is just the coolest thing. So take a listen to how we did it. This is the bridge of the song. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
There's no Jew in the world that needs to be a refugee. No Jew needs to feel that he's homeless. We are Jews. There is a Jewish state. We want to be part of our people and part of our country.
4. Once again, 4. And I wanted to, before I get into decade number 3, I just want to touch on something very important here once again. It's very important that when, to me, I know I'm amidst many other talented musicians, and perhaps they have their own viewpoint, and I would love to hear it if you want to join me later for a conversation about it or put it in the chat. It's very important for me that everything have an emotional arc. When I was working on Birds of Prey, remember the comic book series, the female superhero group series. I touched on a little bit before with you folks that I wanted the women to have an emotional connection. They should interact as friends. And in every episode, we have to, I mean, drama is conflicts. There has to be some kind of conflict. You've all watched TV shows, movies, just sophisticated enough to understand that and to have experienced and to have intuited that conflict is a necessity for any kind of dramatic presentation. And in song, just like in a Birds of Prey story where there had to be conflict, where, you know, the superhero meets a supervillain and they fight and they eventually come to some kind of a conclusion and so forth. Maybe there's a cliffhanger ending. So too in music. It can't just be that everything is even. It's got to be that there are peaks and troughs, that we take you on a journey that is emotional, not only in the lyrics, but also in the music itself. So it begins with something that may be a little bit quieter, and then with the chorus, it goes a little bit higher, perhaps in volume, or perhaps in the notes that are expressing the emotion. And then we come to the bridge, and the bridge is like that twist, you know, in a movie right before you get into the third act, and it seems like everything is coming to a neat conclusion, and it's going to wrap up, and it's going to be a happy ending, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, something happens, and oh my gosh, everything that we thought was going well, it's going terribly now. There's this sudden tension. But that's what the bridge does. It introduces some sudden tension where you go into a different melody that you haven't heard before, and that sends you right out into the final iterations of the chorus. And that, to me, I mean, there's nothing more beautiful, more elegant than a great pop song that does that. I mean, the Beatles did it, and the Beach Boys did it, and hopefully people will think that I've done it as well. So that, once again, when you are writing when you're doing any kind of creative project, you have 4s, and the 4s are, you set it up, and that's the verse, and then you pay it off, and that's the chorus, and then you add new tension, that's number 3, that's the bridge, and in number 4, you have the conclusion, which hopefully is emotionally satisfying. Decade number 3, and then we're going to wrap up. The Passover Haggadah graphic novel, the Jewish Cartoon Workshop, Simcha and Gorfinkel, members of the tribe, and my continued adventures in the Comic-Con and comic book land. All right, we've come to the reason why we talk about Passover so much. For me, the dream of combining my universal pursuits in mainstream media, and especially comic books and graphic novels, and Judaism reached its apex with the recent release of the Amazon #1 seller, the Passover Haggadah graphic novel. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is and you can see it here, the Hebrew and the transliteration, and on the facing page, the translation built into illustrations that bring the story back to life. And you know, folks, I was asked when and this was the entire book, the entire Haggadah, not a single word cut out of it. And I was asked, well, why don't you abridge it? It's a little bit on, you know, the long side, and you know, people dose off or they skip around, just, you know, make it shorter, make it kid friendly. And my attitude was, you know, this book has been around for 2,000 years. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My job here, if I do it right, is to show you through an engaging narrative, an emotionally engaging narrative, why you want to love this book. And it was the logical book to use because, as I talk about in other presentations, the Passover Haggadah is like the Cliff Notes or the Wikipedia of Judaism. It's got everything. It's got philosophy, and it's got history, and it's got archaeology, and it's got thought, and it's got argument, and it's got, of course, music, and of course, it's got food. You know, they tried to kill us, we survived. Let's eat. It's got everything. And what I'm going to do now is show you, once again, thanks to this presentation, I began to realize the number 4 keeps popping up again. And I asked before, so where do you see 4 in Judaism? Well, you see it a lot in the Haggadah, right? Arba Imahot, the 4 matriarchs. And of course, we have the Arba Kushiot, the Manishtana. And of course, you have the 4 children, the Arba Banim. One is wise, one is, it's translated as wicked, one is Tam, a simple, I don't think that's quite right, and Sheno Yodel Lishol, one who does not even know how to ask. Well, someday, hopefully, I'll be able to share with you the Passover Haggadah graphic novel interpretations of these. But I want to focus on the number 4 over here. This is the Shik Haggadah, and this is the more traditional way that we've seen the representation of the 4 children. And, you know, bright, wicked, miserly, a blue-collar worker. For me, the family was the best representation. I mean, after all, it's called banim, children, so it should be family. And you may have noticed from before that there's a little bit of a likeness here because I used my own family, or more accurately, my amazing artist, Erez Tzadok, used my family as representatives for the 4 children. And I want to focus on two characters in particular, the Rasha. The Rasha is mostly translated as the wicked child. And something funny happened along the way of creating an emotionally engaging narrative throughout this entire book of the Haggadah. And the Haggadah, by the way, is not a narrative. It jumps all over the place in time and space. 1 minute you're 2,000 years ago, the next minute you're in the future, you're in the present, you're all over the place. So my job was to figure out, how do I tie it all together? It was the ultimate challenge for somebody who worked on Batman comics. How do you take a book that has no narrative or 3-act structure as we know it today, formally, how all of our entertainment is constructed? How do you turn that into this? Well, this is the way that I did it, using the number 4. So when we first meet the Rasha, he is rebelling, and he's saying, what is this to me? I don't want any part of this Pesach Seder. What does the rebellious child ask? Why do we have to go through all of this, right? And the answer is, well, you wouldn't have been rescued if you had been rebellious. We would have left you behind. That's the first time we see the Rasha. But then he becomes a recurring character. You know, in Batman and Birds of Prey and Marvel movies and everything else, you see the characters repeating over and over and over again. Like, with a Jewish cartoon, right? You have a family of characters. So if you see them once, you enjoy the gag. But if you see them repeatedly, it gives you emotional depth. It gives you connection and engagement that you otherwise might not have had. So in the next section that we see him, we see that he is being a little bit sarcastic, but he's engaging. That's the second time we see him. And the third time we see him is later on in the Haggadah, when we're pointing out the 3 main parts of matzah, maror, and I skipped one, of course. It's Pesach, matzah, and maror. And we see over here that the child is beginning to reflect on, well, what would it have been like if he had actually been there? And in the beginning, he didn't want anything to do with it. Then he began to engage. Now he's actually imagining it. And spoiler alert, look at the payoff over here, folks. The whole Dor Vador in every generation. So how do we represent this in the Passover Haggadah graphic novel? In the way that all of us now get together and gather virtually by taking a selfie. And who's the person who's taking the selfie? None other than the Rasha, who has been rehabilitated. Yes, folks, the quote unquote wicked child is the one who, through love and engagement, maybe by even reading the Passover Haggadah graphic novel, has been brought back into the fold. You know, people always ask me, what is the most important part of Judaism to you? And I always say it's very simple. And I'll talk about this as I conclude in a couple of minutes or so. I don't want to bring people to me. I practice Judaism in the way that I do, and I'm proud to be a Jew, and I'm passionate about being Jewish. And I'm hoping that through my own activities, my projects, my example, that I will be able to go to other Jews and meet them where they are at, and we can all combine together. We can all unify in a way that that the whole Dor Vador represents, like this, Jews throughout the generations. And we'll get to that musically in a second. Now, there is a second set of 4 using, again, recurring characters and emotionally engagement and all these themes that we've been talking about. And I actually heard a talk from Natan Sharansky, the most famous refusenik, who said that he laments that today's generation doesn't remember the Soviet Jewry suffering and eventual amazing support by the Jewish community in the 70s. And as it happens, I don't know why, but actually I do know why. I used a refusenik as a character, as a recurring character in the Passover graphic novel. And I know the reason why, because, forgive me, the automatic assumption is when you want to represent something that is really wrong and sad in Judaism, you go to the Holocaust. And heaven knows, I have done my Holocaust projects. My wife often jokes that I have cornered the market in very depressing subjects. But I thought, here is a corner of history that really represents this idea of coming out of darkness, of being redeemed from darkness into the light, from slavery to freedom, the refusenik. And here's how we did it. In the beginning, we were worshiping idols. And what's more like idol worshiping than a totalitarian regime, which you can see in the first panel, the first box over here represented by a statue. And then as the story goes on, Behisha Amda, but we stood up together to overcome. Let's compare the 2 pages and notice how not only are the characters recurring, I even found a way to reprise the situation. So in the first, when we're in Russia, the child is taking a picture of the guy visiting the refusenik and bringing him matzah and a Haggadah. And then in the next page that we see him, he has that picture and he carries it around in his pocket as inspiration to him. And then in the third time we see Seol Mad, come and learn, who's he with? He's older now and he's in Israel and he's with his family. And he's bringing the next generation. He's been inspired despite, he had every reason to throw away his Judaism. It was so hard to be Jewish in totalitarian Russia, in the USSR. And yet here he is. And finally, when we see him at the end, Nishmat Kol Chai, during Hallel, when we sing songs of praise that let the soul of every creature bless God, we have the refuseniks walking literally on the graves of the Egyptians, half buried in the sand. They are history, but we persevere. And for more, once again, my 4 children presentation. Let's see an example of this in music and humor with members of the tribe. And I'll have to go quickly here. Let's play the beginning of this, and then we'll talk about the structure of this, and you'll see how it all ties together.
M-O-T, M-O-T, more than one way to be. M-O-T, M-O-T, that's me. Hey.
He wears a beanie and 17 times a day stops to pray.
He sips a martini in silk pajamas while playing croquet.
He wears fringes and eats only boiled foods with no taste.
When he binges, no part of the pig goes to waste.
But we're both
Members of the tribe, albeit with a different vibe. Opposites head to toe, identical down below. We're 2 flavors of conditions, we're 2 separate sets of dishes, but we both self-describe as members of the tribe.
That was Sean Altman, by the way. And as you can see, I'm bringing all the strands together, unifying through the use of the number 4. 4. 4. And yes, that was a little bit on the racy side. I apologize for those of you for whom it might be a little bit of a sensitive thing, but sometimes in entertainment, you got to exaggerate, you got to go to the mat in order to make your point and draw people in. I also teach all these principles in my Jewish cartoon workshop for students of all ages, and I do mean all ages, families, adults, children, and so forth. You can see me with large groups of campers and students here. And I invite you to craft your own 4. You can do it as a poem, you can do it as a song, you can do it as a cartoon strip. Just think about the number 4 as you continue to be creative. And what's next for me, for Gorf? In decade number 4, Kodesh Graphi. I'm launching a Jewish graphic novel line. And by the way, the Haggadah was nonprofit, so too will be this Jewish graphic novel line. If anybody's interested in participating or perhaps leading me to funding, that would be certainly welcome. KZYS Productions, Kol Zimmer, has merged with the Y Studs to offer a broader spectrum of a cappella services. ACE, we continue to do comics, and who knows what else is going to come next. So let me just give you a quick preview of the Bir Cohn, the Ben Shur graphic novel. You know, we all say Jewish prayers, and many times we don't understand what we're saying or we're not focused, and I'm guilty as much as anybody. So the grace after meals, what does it mean? When we light candles, what are we drawing inspiration from? What are we doing it for? So by once again combining the Hebrew words and the transliteration with translation built into beautiful graphic novel illustrations, we're hoping to make this Bir Cohn something that can be treasured and hopefully enlightening for the entire Jewish people. And I just want to point out one fun little aspect of it, because you got to have fun with this sort of stuff. You may recognize the inspiration for this drawing over here. Hamalach HaGoelot is the song that is traditionally sung to children when they're going to sleep. You say Shema and you sing Hamalach HaGoelot. So naturally, Goodnight Moon would be an inspiration for this panel. And in conclusion, the number 4 unlocks engaging storytelling in any medium, in any genre. What's my superpower? Embracing Judaism in all of my pursuits, in any medium, in any genre, universally and in Jewish. And now, folks, after hopefully getting a little bit of taste, a little bit of insight into it, it's your superpower too. Chag Sameach, happy Hanukkah, and early happy Pesach. And if you're interested in more details and to contact me, info and videos at jewishcartoon.com. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to have the honor and privilege, God willing, in good health, to visit you in person sometime soon with comics, with music, and hey, just to share a little bit of matzah.
Gorf, thank you so much. That was just absolutely wonderful. A journey from start to finish. We got no questions for you in the chat box. I feel like you've tied up your life in such a beautiful 4-sided package for us. But folks, if you have any questions for Gorf, reach out to him through his website or through me. Hanukkah Sameach, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hanukkah, thank you.